Welcome to the 111th episode of the Henry George Daily Devotional, where we read Progress in Poverty, an inquiry into the cause of industrial depressions and increase of want with increase of wealth, the remedy, by Henry George, published in 1879. We are in Book 10, The Law of Human Progress, Chapter 3, The Law of Human Progress. This has been the longest chapter in the book so far, I think, or at least we've had to do it. We're breaking it up so many parts. George writes, European civilization differs in character from civilizations of the Egyptian type, because it springs not from the association of a homogeneous people developing from the beginning, or at least for a long time, under the same conditions, but from the association of people who in separation had acquired distinctive social characteristics, and whose smaller organizations thus prevented the concentration of power and wealth in one center. Yeah, Europe. A lot of variety. The physical conformation of the Grecian peninsula is such as to separate the people at first into a small number of communities. I don't know the topology of Greek very well. As those petty republics and nominal kingdoms ceased to waste their energies in warfare and the peaceable cooperation of commerce extended, the light of civilization blazed up. But the principle of association was never strong enough to save Greece from intertribal war, and when this was put to an end, and this was put an end to by conquest, the tendency to inequality which had been combated with various devices by Grecian sages and statesmen worked its result, and Grecian valor, art, and literature became things of the past. And so in the rise and extension, the decline and fall of Roman civilization may be seen the working of these two principles of association and equality, from the combination of which springs progress. Quick note about George's understanding of the Greek. He would not have known about Aristotle's Constitutions or something like that, which was found on a scroll in like 1880 or 1879, right as he was publishing this. The first English translation was like in 1890, and from that is how he learned about how the Greeks used sortition in one of their phases of democracy, which was the forming of legislative bodies by the drawing of lots. A form of government I am very interested in, partly because I believe it would be one of the ways we could actually implement the single land value tax. Uh, because the more I read about the popularity of Georgism and the land value tax after George published this book, the more it seems like it did persuade a lot of people, a lot of working men, and even got into the hearts of a number of politicians, but it was never quite enough to consistently combat the special interests and the landed class. Although I am seeking to learn a little bit more about Pennsylvania because they seem to have had a revival starting in the 80s. And some of their land taxes are still operating. Um, anyway, back to George. Springing from the association of the independent husbandmen and free citizens of Italy, and gaining fresh strength from conquests which brought hostile nations into common relations, the Roman power hushed the world in peace. Yeah, a lot of conquest, huh? But the tendency to inequality, checking real progress from the first, increased as the Roman civilization extended. The Roman civilization did not petrify as did the homogeneous civilizations, where the strong bonds of custom and superstition that held the people in subjection probably also protected them, or at any rate kept the peace between rulers and ruled. It rotted, declined, and fell. But you have to say the Roman Empire lasted a good long while. Long before Goth or Vandal had broken through the cordon of the legions, even while her frontiers were advancing. I guess this is why we describe things as being cordoned off. A line of people, military or posts, or ship station on air, team closing guard, a rope line or tape border, unusual about policing. Yeah. What's etymology? Is it the same as a cord? To ornament with a ribbon. Blue. Small rope. Yeah, that was its first, I guess. Even while her frontiers were advancing, Rome was dead at the heart. Great estates had ruined Italy. A latifundia. Inequality had dried up the strength and destroyed the vigor of the Roman world. If you haven't been listening or watching all 110 episodes up until now, the great Italian estates were called latifundias. They were like plantations. George thinks this was a big source of inequality and ultimate rot, as he's now calling it. Inequality had dried up the strength in Italy. That was their thing, latifundias. A latifundium was originally a term of great landed estates specializing in agriculture. Yeah. Like Maximus had a latifundia. Maximus, Spain, house. Yes, when he's coming home. No one was even out there working. Inequality dropped the strength of the Roman government became despotism, which even assassination could not temper. We just had an assassination attempt. Patriotism became servility. Vices, the most foul, fought themselves in public. Literature sank to puerilities. Learning was forgotten. The fertile districts became waste without the ravages of war. Everywhere inequality produced decay, political, mental, moral, and material. The barbarism which overwhelmed Rome came not from without, but from within. It was the necessary product of the system which had substituted slaves and coloni for, it's funny, they didn't say colonies, for the independent husbandmen of Italy and carved the provinces into estates of senatorial families. Modern civilization owes its superiority. I don't know if I can finish this chapter today. To the growth of equality with the growth of association. The two great causes contributed to this, the splitting up of concentrated power into innumerable little centers by the influx of the northern nations and the influence of Christianity. Without the first, there would have been the petrifaction and slow decay of the Eastern Empire, where church and state were closely married, and loss of external power brought no relief of internal tyranny. And but for the other, there would have been barbarism without principle of association or amelioration. The petty chiefs and alloidial lords who everywhere grasped local sovereignty held each other in check. Italian cities recovered their ancient liberty, free towns were founded, village communities took root, and serfs acquired rights in the soil they tilled. The leaven of Teutonic ideas of equality worked through the disorganized and disjointed fabric of society. And although Society was split up into an innumerable number of separated fragments, yet the idea of a closer association was always present. It existed in the recollections of a universal empire, it existed in the claims of a universal church. Though Christianity became distorted and alloyed in percolating through a rotting civilization, though pagan gods were taken into her pantheon, and pagan forms into her ritual, and pagan ideas into her creed, yet her essential idea of the equality of men was never wholly destroyed, and two things happened of the utmost moment to incipient civilization. I remember reading this before. The establishment of the papacy and the celibacy of the clergy. The first, making a pope, the first prevented the spiritual power from concentrating in the same lines as the temporal power. I like how we call a king a temporal power. Yes. I mean, does temporal mean other than just in time? Temples is another meaning. But I think that's funny because this is of temples, but then here it is of the secular, distinguished from sacred or eternal present life. This is what they mean. This is what George means by the king. A very complex bone situated in this. Okay, we're not talking about the temporal bone. And the latter, which is the celibacy of the clergy, I never really thought about this until I read George about even the significance or why it came to be. The latter prevented the establishment of a priestly caste during a time when all power tended to hereditary form. I had always thought the celibacy, and maybe it is partly this, was, you know, because Paul's like, if you are burning with desire, fine, get married, but it's better to stay single, devote your whole life to God. That would be a good excuse, but there's this cool bonus that if priests can't have kids, they can't pass on their power to their kid. During a time when all power tended to hereditary form. Yeah. In her efforts for the abolition of slavery, in her truce of God, in her monastic orders, in her councils which united nations, and her edicts which ran without regard to political boundaries, in the low-born hands in which she placed a sign before which the proudest knelt, in her bishops who by consecration became the peers of the greatest nobles, in her servant of servants, for so his official title ran, who, by virtue of the ring of a simple fisherman, claimed the right to arbitrate between nations, and whose stirrup was held by kings, the church. That's who we're talking. That's who she is in all of this. Her efforts for the abolition of slavery, truce of God, monastic orders. The church, in spite of everything, was yet a promoter of association, a witness. Yeah, it's also funny, like, oh, who are these simple fishermen who just wore a ring that they should get to arbitrate between nations and kings? It's like, well, who are these kings except just dudes who got born in the right house? A promoter of association, a witness for the natural equality of men, and by the church herself was nurtured a spirit that when her early work of association and emancipation was well nigh done, when the ties she had knit had become strong, and the learning she had preserved had been given to the world, broke the chains with which she would have fettered the human mind, and in a great part of Europe rent her organization. The rise and growth of European civilization is too vast and complex a subject to be thrown into proper perspective and relation in a few paragraphs, but in all its details as in its main features it illustrates the truth that progress goes on just as society tends toward closer association and greater equality. Civilization is cooperation. Union and liberty are its factors. The great extension of association, not alone in the growth of larger and denser communities, but in the increase of commerce and the manifold exchanges which knit each community together, and link them with other, though widely separated communities. It's funny, hearing him talk about all these communities, and it makes me wonder what kind of description he would apply to our society, whether or not we have all these communities, what he would exactly describe the suburbs as, these isolated communities. The growth of international and municipal law, the advances in security of property and of person, and individual liberty, and towards democratic government. Advances, in short, towards the recognition of the. As much as I am on this sortition kick, it does seem that representative electoral government uh, is is superior to a simple king, or the idea of just noble blood. Anyway, advances in short towards the recognition of the equal rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It is these that make our modern civilization so much greater, so much higher than any that has gone before. I think maybe this is all about Europe, and then when we talk about America, it's this, all this, plus a whole bunch of land, and the chance to sort of restart without a bloody uprising. But of course, America had to, start from the bottom. It is these that have set free the mental power which has rolled back the veil of ignorance which hid all but a small portion of the globe from men's knowledge, which has measured the orbits of the circling spheres and bids us see moving, pulsing life in a drop of water, which has opened to us the antechamber of nature's mysteries and read the secrets of a long buried past, which has harnessed in our service physical forces beside which a man's efforts are puny, and increased productive power by 1,000 great inventions. Yeah, it's always funny to read George's perspective on their technology being so advanced and promising and incredible, and we look at their like early industrial revolution era as being so uh, undeveloped still. In that spirit of fatalism to which I have alluded as pervading current literature, it is the fashion to speak even of war and slavery as means of human progress. But war, which is the opposite of association, can aid progress only when it prevents further war or breaks down antisocial barriers, which are themselves passive war. I wonder, I wonder which wars and which sides of which wars George would have supported. As for slavery, I cannot see how it could ever have aided in establishing freedom, and freedom, the synonym of equality, is from the very rudest state in which man can be imagined, the stimulus and condition of progress, freedom and equality. Well, freedom is the synonym of equality. Auguste Comte's idea that the institution of slavery destroyed cannibalism is as fanciful. Oh, that's funny. I don't remember this. That I guess this was a thing. People were like, "Yeah, slavery is better than cannibalism." But I don't think cannibalism was that widespread. And I do know that lots of times when we think of cannibalism, it's not like there were societies that lived off of consumption of other men. It was usually some very, I would say, perverted religious sacrament or rare ritual, as far as I know. But I'm not a historian. Uh, the institution of slavery destroyed cannibalism is as fanciful as Elia's humorous notion of the way mankind acquired a taste for roast pig. Oh, I have read this story. Uh, it is pretty funny. About burning a house down. They accidentally roasted some pig, and nobody figured out in this story that you could roast a pig without burning a house down, so everyone started burning houses down because roast pig tastes so good. Going back to George, it assumes that a propensity that has never been found developed in man, save as the result of the most unnatural conditions, the direst want, or the most brutalizing superstitions. Okay, that's what George is saying. The propensity, which is this idea that cannibalism has never developed in man, only in unnatural conditions or the direst want, or the most brutalizing superstitions. We have a footnote. The Sandwich Islanders did honor to their good chiefs by eating their bodies. Their bad and tyrannical chiefs they would not touch. The New Zealander had a notion that by eating their enemies they acquired their strength and valor, and this seems to be the general origin of eating prisoners of war. Yeah, it wasn't for the calories. George says this idea is an original impulse and that he, even in his lowest state, the highest of all animals, has natural appetites which the nobler brutes do not show. And so of the idea that slavery began civilization by giving slave owners leisure for improvement. Okay. It assumes all of this. Yeah, so George doesn't buy the idea that slavery enabled civilization at all. Slavery never did and never could aid improvement, whether the community consists, all right, we'll get through this, of a single master and a single slave, or of thousands of masters and millions of slaves. Slavery necessarily involves a waste of human power, for not only is slave labor less productive than free labor, but the power of masters is likewise wasted in holding and watching their slaves, and is called away from directions in which real improvement lies. From first to last, slavery, like every other denial of the natural equality of man, has hampered and prevented progress. This seems like it's also might be true of middle management, because somebody has to crack the whip on all of the wage slaves. Just in proportion as slavery plays an important part in the social organization does improvement cease. That in the classical world slavery was so universal is undoubtedly the reason why the mental activity which so polished literature and refined art never hit on any of the great discoveries and inventions which distinguish modern civilization. No slaveholding people ever were an inventive people. In a slaveholding community, the upper classes may become luxurious and polished, but never inventive. Whatever degrades the laborer. So here, somebody could fight with me over my view that we should abolish patents because I feel like that's the one thing in our society you might be able to say is driving some innovation, IP rights and patents. However, I would try to argue, I'm still trying to figure this out. I mean, George is against patents, but IP rights he supported. Uh, I'm trying to figure this out. I would want to argue that a bunch of invention is not happening because of IP right IP rights and patents preventing people from using all of these things already made. Maybe, but they are licensed out. I mean, at best, I think I have to argue that our method of patents and licensing is retarding our development. Same with same with copyright. But you could also argue a lot of our progress has really slowed down. And it was maybe just the momentum that got us what we're still doing now. I don't know. Whatever degrades the laborer and robs him of the fruits of his toil stifles the spirit of invention and forbids the utilization of inventions and discoveries even when made. But maybe you could say that patent monopolies, IP monopolies, they give a sort of fighting chance against the land monopolies. But it is becoming true that these big tech companies just sort of gobble them all up. I don't know. To freedom alone is given the spell of power which summons the genii, in whose keeping are the treasures of the earth and the viewless forces of the air. I'm not sure. Viewless forces of the air. Huh. The law of human progress, what is it but the moral law? Just as social development, social adjustments promote justice, just as they acknowledge the equality of right between man and man, just as they ensure to each the perfect liberty which is bounded only by the equal liberty of every other, must civilization advance. Yeah, you're right to swing your, how does that go? You're right to swing your arm ends where my nose begins or something. This should be a capital J. Just as they fail in this, must advancing civilization come to a halt and recede. Political economy and social science cannot teach any lessons that are not embraced in the simple truths that were taught to poor fishermen and Jewish peasants by one who 1800 years ago was crucified. The simple truths which, beneath the warpings of selfishness and the distortions of superstition, seem to underlie every religion that has ever striven to formulate the spiritual yearnings of man. And so we finish Chapter 3, The Law of Human Progress. In Book 10, The Law of Human Progress, we have decided the law of human progress is the moral law. And this is the most compelling argument for the land tax in my book, the moral aspect. But the efficiency aspect is also devastatingly true. And I guess the necessary relation. Whoops. Whoa. I can't even go back? Forward. I guess I went back. I did this and I clicked back. Well, thanks for joining me. See you next time. The law of progress is the moral law. Freedom is equality. Equality is justice. Association and justice are the ingredients of progress, continued fairness allows continued progress. So I feel like he did do a fair amount in there to talk about where fairness gets broken down. He didn't have much of an answer for if that's at all preventable. Which is kind of a drag. Kind of a drag. The law is a human institution. The land value tax would solve that. Hmm. All right. We are done. Is there going to be any sunshine today? Hmm. What happens at 11 and 12? A bit cloudy. All right. I will see. What is that? Oh, shortcut. Oh, shortcut. How does... Hmm. All right. See you later.